In this video, we'll be taking a look at 4 college basketball games happening on March 5th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 8 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 4 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Tulane versus Temple. The scene shifts to Philadelphia into the Liacouras Center, where 2 familiar foes are trying to squeeze a little more life out of their seasons. Tulane walks in at 17-12, Temple sits at 15-14, and both are still chasing a better spot in the American athletic pecking order rather than packing for an early offseason. The first meeting in New Orleans went Tulane's way, a 77-66 win that felt like one long shooting slump for Temple, with jumpers clanging just a bit too hard and just a bit too often. Now the environment changes, the crowd, the rims, even the energy in the building, and Temple gets its chance to respond at home, with that loss still sitting in the back of their minds like an unfinished argument. Temple's year has played out like a drama that never quite nails the final scene. They hang around, they battle, they make you think this is the night it all clicks, then the last few minutes show up and the result slips away again by 1 or 2 possessions. Those recent defeats have mostly been tight, not blowouts, which says more about late-game execution than about talent or effort. Underneath the record, Temple's numbers quietly tell a more flattering story, scoring a touch more on average than Tulane while allowing slightly fewer points, and grading more efficient on offense while staying roughly in the same neighborhood on defense. It is not flashy, but it is the kind of profile that usually holds up well in a home gym where every small edge feels a little bigger. Style-wise, the contrast is part of the fun. Tulane is comfortable speeding things up, playing at a pace that leans toward free-flowing possessions, quick decisions, and a bit of controlled chaos. Temple prefers something closer to a methodical, problem-solving rhythm, closer to a half-court exam than a fast break contest, and that difference in approach matters when the whistles get tighter and every possession starts to matter more. Rebounding is another quiet factor that keeps nudging this matchup in one direction because Tulane's issues on the glass are not a secret. Sitting at the bottom of the conference in offensive boards and carrying a noticeably negative rebounding margin, they often give away second chances over the course of 40 minutes. And that usually shows up more clearly when you are on the road, not sleeping in your own bed. Temple, pushed by the memory of that double-digit loss and backed by a home crowd that has seen plenty of almosts, gets a chance to lean into its more stable efficiency, its rebounding edge, and its familiarity with this opponent, and all of that sets up a side that feels better built to handle the little swings that decide which ticket cashes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Temple Owls to cover the spread is our full game side pick. The scoring story feels trickier at first glance because Tulane's pace-friendly style and Temple's ability to score in spurts might tempt you to imagine a wide-open shootout from the jump. The first meeting landed on 143 total points, which sits in that gray area where it looks high enough to feel entertaining, but not quite like a full-on track meet. Recent games have painted a similar picture, with Tulane living in a range where some nights stretch into the mid-150s, others sag into the low 100s, and plenty fall right around the mid-140s. Temple's totals during this rough stretch have leaned slightly lower overall, bouncing between higher-scoring outings and tighter, more restrained games that settle into the high 120s or low 140s instead of racing up the ladder. Put together, both teams drift toward the low to mid-140s more often than not, which already nudges the imagination toward a game that flirts with that zone rather than blowing past it. Here is the thing, the pace numbers that sound moderate on paper actually matter quite a bit for the total. Neither side is playing at a truly blistering speed, even if Tulane feels fast compared to Temple. Around 70 possessions for one and the high 60s for the other is more like medium-tempo basketball than a full-throttle, up-and-down showcase. When that is combined with a conference rematch where coaching staffs have fresh film, familiar actions, and a deeper sense of the other team's pet sets, the scoring environment often tightens rather than loosens. Defenses switch more confidently, help rotations arrive a beat quicker, and the element of surprise that can gift you 10 easy points just is not there in the same way. Temple's better nights lately have come when it leans into that kind of controlled game, using defense, rebounding, and deliberate possessions to keep things in a manageable scoring window. A thinner guard rotation after losing one key backcourt piece for the season and cutting ties with another also quietly encourages a slower approach because you simply do not want to play a frantic, high-possession game when your main ball handlers are logging heavy minutes. Fewer trips up and down the floor means fewer chances for fatigue or foul trouble to wreck the rotation, which usually drops the total number of possessions and with it the total number of points. On the other side, Tulane still fits that glass cannon description, capable of putting the ball in the basket, but also giving up more points on average than it scores, and often surrendering extra opportunities because of its rebounding issues. In a rematch on the road against a defense that just saw all their actions a few weeks ago, it becomes harder for those offensive bursts to come out of nowhere and easier for the game to slide into longer, more contested trips rather than quick, clean looks. When you blend all of that together, the most likely script does not scream out a wild, free-scoring spectacle. It suggests something more like a competitive game that lives in that 136 to 142 neighborhood, where every possession feels heavy and the scoring never quite breaks loose into the kind of pace that sends the total soaring. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Coach can start to feel strained when a team like Michigan keeps nudging the pace up, nudging the physicality up, and forcing you to handle 40 minutes of pressure instead of 20. Health and depth play into this picture too. Michigan's main rotation is intact, and the guys who carry the heaviest load are on the floor and in rhythm. Yes, they have some injuries among their secondary guards, and that does chip away at the safety net, but the main weapons are ready and have already proven they can handle big minutes in tough gyms. Iowa has its own depth piece on the shelf, which nudges a bit more responsibility onto the shoulders of their core players in a game that will demand a lot of energy and focus. When you add in the psychological side, with Michigan chasing style points and Iowa chasing respect, it sets up a scenario where one team is built to keep stretching the gap once it opens. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan Wolverines to cover the spread is our full game side pick. On one side, you have Michigan, a team that treats early offense like a habit, pushing off misses, off makes, and sometimes off sheer instinct. They love to run, they love to attack the rim, and they have enough shooting to punish any defense that collapses a step late. Games involving that kind of pace rarely feel quiet on the scoreboard, even when the defense is good, because the sheer number of trips up and down the floor creates chances for both teams. Iowa brings a very different personality to the scoring conversation. They play at a calmer tempo, almost like a team that wants to take a deep breath on each possession. They hunt good looks, they value spacing, and they usually do not throw the ball away, which means a lot of their trips end with a real shot rather than a careless turnover. Their defense is not soft either, holding opponents to modest totals and forcing them to work for clean looks. That combination, steady offense and sturdy defense, often leads to controlled games that sit in that middle band of scoring, not a full track meet, but not a grind that puts everyone to sleep. Here is the thing though, even a team that prefers control can get pulled into a quicker rhythm when the opponent keeps poking at the gas pedal. Michigan's ability to generate early offense, draw fouls, and live at the rim has a way of forcing more possessions and more decisions from the other side. Free throws matter a lot in that story because every whistle with the clock stopped adds points without burning time, and late in games, that can snowball fast. If Iowa is chasing the scoreboard, they will have to be a little more aggressive, take a few earlier shots, and that can shift the pace just enough to raise the ceiling on total points. Iowa's own scoring profile quietly supports that idea. They shoot well from the field, can hit threes at a solid clip, and they are comfortable in the half court when they get their actions flowing. Even if they stick to their preferred tempo, their efficiency gives them a path into the high 60s or 70s on a good night, especially at home in a fired-up building. And if the game bends even slightly toward Michigan's preferred speed, those efficient possessions start stacking up faster than usual, one good possession after another. It is not guaranteed fireworks, but the ingredients for a lively total are sitting right there, from transition chances to whistle-driven points and late-game possessions that get squeezed for every last shot. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Manhattan versus Fairfield. Manhattan Jaspers and Fairfield Stags meet in Atlantic City, and it feels a little like a long family argument getting dragged into a neutral courtroom where nobody can hide behind their home crowd anymore. Fairfield walks in with a record of 19-12, the more polished 6th seed that has mostly handled its business, while Manhattan shows up at 12-19, the scrappy 10 seed that has lived closer to chaos than comfort all season. They already traded blows in the regular season, with Manhattan grabbing a tight 70-66 win at home, then Fairfield answering with that loud 98-62 statement that turned into a running clock kind of night by the second half. So right from the jump, you have two versions of this matchup locked in the memory, one where Manhattan drags Fairfield into a grind, and one where Fairfield flips the switch and turns it into a mismatch. Manhattan's whole season has felt like betting on mood swings. They score in that mid-70s range, which sounds nice enough, but they also give up close to 80 a night, and that is the part that keeps coaches up staring at hotel ceilings. Their defense is not just leaky, it is the kind that makes every opponent feel a little better about themselves, and that is why so many of their games turn into long, bumpy runs instead of clean, controlled performances. They lean into physical play, they send opponents to the line, and they live with that trade-off because it can create wild swings that sometimes help a heavy underdog stay alive longer than expected. Honestly, that makes them a fun underdog to watch, but it also makes them the type of team that can be chasing 10 points in a hurry if a few possessions go sideways. Fairfield sits on the opposite side of that personality spectrum. They are not some unstoppable juggernaut, but their numbers tell a steadier story, scoring around the mid-70s while keeping opponents closer to the low 70s, which stacks up over a full season as a real edge in control. They rebound a bit better, they foul a bit less, they string together more competent defensive trips, and that kind of stability shows up in a record like 19-12 instead of 12-19. You could see the gap clearly in that 98-62 win, when Fairfield's balance and structure finally overwhelmed Manhattan's tendency to slip into defensive breakdowns. On a true neutral floor, inside a bigger arena, with tournament pressure humming in the background, that reliable structure usually travels better than the let us see what happens style that Manhattan leans on. Fairfield's path to covering involves doing exactly what they have done most of the year, keeping the ball in the hands of the right decision makers, keeping Manhattan out of rhythm, and letting their slightly stronger defense squeeze the game when it matters most. Manhattan's path involves a perfect storm, whistles in their favor, streaky shooting, Fairfield mistakes that do not show up in their season-long profile, and that is not impossible, but it is a lot more fragile. Here is the thing, when one team has to be nearly perfect just to keep up with another team that can win playing its usual brand of basketball, the spread tends to lean in only one direction for a reason, especially in a tournament setting. As our first pick for this matchup, the Fairfield Stags to cover the spread is our full game side pick. On one side, Manhattan drags the number upward every time it steps on the floor, scoring in that mid-70s range while letting opponents live near 80, which turns most of their nights into track meets with a scoreboard that rarely takes a breath. On the other side, Fairfield brings a bit more order, still capable of putting up solid scoring totals, but pairing that with defense that trims a few possessions here and there and holds opponents in the low 70s more often than not. So when you mix those two styles, you get a kind of tug of war, one team trying to fly, the other quietly tapping the brakes without making it obvious. The regular season meetings put that contrast in bright lights. In the first game, Manhattan's win landed in a more modest range, 70-66, which felt like a game where both teams had to work for every clean look. In the second, Fairfield's blowout pushed everything into a much higher scoring space, 98-62, partly because Manhattan's defense never really showed up and partly because Fairfield kept its foot on the gas once it sensed blood. Put those two totals together and you get an average that sits in that high-scoring neighborhood, but the way those games got there matters more than the raw math. One was tight and choppy, the other was a runaway, and tournament basketball tends to look a whole lot more like the tense one than the free-flowing beatdown. Tournament settings have a way of shaving off some of the wildness. Neutral rims in a big arena can feel a little unforgiving early, and guys who are usually relaxed suddenly feel their legs get heavy because they know a bad night might end their season. Coaches shorten rotations, they call timeouts faster, and they start valuing each possession like it is the last slice of pizza in the locker room. You get longer half-court possessions, more deliberate sets, and fewer of those wild, heat-check runs that blow totals into extreme territory. Manhattan's natural chaos does not vanish, but it can get dulled by tournament nerves and by officials who sometimes swallow the whistle a bit more around the rim, which quietly trims free throw volume and cheap points. Fairfield's presence nudges things toward a slightly calmer pace too. They are comfortable playing in the 70s, they know how to manage a lead, and if they find themselves ahead late, they are far more likely to slow things down and force Manhattan to execute against a set defense instead of sprinting back and forth. That kind of game script does not eliminate scoring, but it often keeps the final total from exploding as high as Manhattan's season-long defensive numbers might suggest at first glance. Let me explain. When one team that loves chaos meets another that prefers control in a win or go-home environment, the setup quietly favors a result that lands a bit lower than the wildest versions of this matchup, even if there are a few swings along the way. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. South Dakota State versus St. Thomas, Minnesota. Tournament games in early March at the Denny Sanford Premier Center have that funny split personality, neutral in name, but packed with familiar colors and long memories in the stands. South Dakota State shows up at 14-17 overall and 7-9 in league play, stuck in that tricky zone where the team is dangerous enough to frighten people, but not steady enough that you trust them from night to night. It is the kind of profile that makes you think, yeah, they could absolutely pop once, but also, they could absolutely vanish for 10 minutes and bury themselves, sometimes in the same half. St. Thomas walks into this thing at 23-8 and 12-4 in the conference, carrying a top-tier seed and the extra weight of finally being fully eligible to turn this whole summit run into an actual NCAA ticket. That shift from transition project to true contender matters, not just on paper, but in how they carry themselves possession by possession. The Tommies have spent the season operating with a cleaner, more polished offense, sharing the ball, getting north of 17 assists a night, and generally looking like the group that knows exactly where the next good shot is coming from. On the other side, South Dakota State usually settles into the mid-70s on the scoreboard, which is respectable, but they lean much more on rhythm and streaks. When that rhythm is there, they look like the team nobody wants to see. When it is not, they can grind to a halt and put a lot of pressure on a defense that already lives right around the same scoring range that St. Thomas allows, roughly the low 70s. So you get this odd contrast, one team built on structure and repetition, the other more reliant on catching a wave and riding it for as long as possible. The head-to-head evidence we do have is pretty loud. St. Thomas already marched into Brookings once this season and walked out with a 77-62 win on the road, and it was not some wild shootout or fluky barrage. It was a controlled, professional job built on guarding, forcing tough looks, and then punishing mistakes on the other end. That kind of road result says a lot when you then pick the whole matchup up and drop it into a bigger neutral building. Travel form adds another small but real nudge. St. Thomas has been solid away from home, with a winning record on the road and at least a functional mark on neutral courts, which tells you their identity tends to travel well. South Dakota State has struggled once you take them out of their own gym, sitting with a losing record away and a rougher time on neutral floors, which makes it harder to project them as the more reliable group in a tournament setting. You can absolutely build a story where the Jackrabbits get hot and make this stressful, because that is what volatile teams do, but you have to bend a lot of what we have seen across the season to make that story the main one. Honestly, when you stack the season-long profiles, the previous meeting, and the neutral court factor next to each other, the picture that keeps forming is of St. Thomas gradually taking control. Maybe it is not instant, and maybe South Dakota State throws the first punch, but the team that keeps its spacing, keeps its passing game, and keeps its defensive shape usually pulls away late in spots like this. Let me explain it this way. It is like a long road trip on the interstate. The car with the smoother engine and steadier driver might not look flashy for the first half hour, but over time it starts to put real distance between itself and the one that keeps tapping the brakes. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. Thomas Tommies to cover the spread is our full game side pick. You look at St. Thomas scoring a bit more than 80 points per game, and South Dakota State living in that mid-70s range, and your brain immediately sketches out a track meet with shots flying and the score bug racing. It is tempting because we all love a game where the net barely gets a chance to rest. Here is the thing, the way these teams actually operate, especially in serious moments, leans more toward control than chaos. St. Thomas has an offense that feels free, but underneath that freedom sits a lot of discipline and a defense that holds opponents in the low 70s on average. South Dakota State, for all the streakiness on offense, ends up allowing about the same number on the other end. So on both sides you have groups that can absolutely score, but that also have enough structure to squeeze games into more deliberate stretches when it matters. The first time they met, the final was 77-62. That is 139 total points, which is not some rock fight, but it is also not the kind of number that screams no defense was played here today. What stands out from that game is how St. Thomas managed to keep things on their terms, limiting big runs and forcing more half-court possessions, which quietly drags the total down even while the result feels decisive. Neutral site basketball adds its own little quirks to the scoring picture. Different sightlines in a larger arena, a new backdrop behind the rim, and slightly different energy in the seats often shave a few points off early shooting. Players need a bit of time to feel comfortable, and while both teams can adjust, that adjustment period still shows up on the box score as a stretch of missed jumpers and cautious possessions. In a regular season game, coaches might be fine trading early haymakers. In a tournament setting, with elimination hanging over every mistake, they are much more likely to value each trip and slow things down when they feel the game getting loose. Tournament pressure has a funny way of sneaking into shot selection too. Guys who would normally fire from deep without thinking suddenly hesitate for half a second, and that half second turns a clean look into a drive, a kick out, or even a reset. All of that burns clock. Defenses, knowing one stop could change the whole night, dig in a little harder on closeouts and ball screens. The result is not always pretty, but it is often a bit lower scoring than the raw season averages might suggest. Of course, there is always the wild card of late-game fouling, and that can stack points in a hurry. But for that to really blow things up, you need a pace and a shot profile that are already pushing the total into a high-scoring zone before those last couple of minutes. Here, the combination of two defenses that can hold the line, a previous meeting that landed in a more modest range, and the natural drag of a neutral court tournament atmosphere all tilt toward a game that feels more controlled than freewheeling. So while the names and offensive averages might whisper shootout, the overall shape of this matchup speaks more softly about a game that lands under that expectation. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.